Back when Steve Jobs first announced the very first iPad back in 2010, I remember watching that keynote and saying, man, that would make a great tool for preaching. And now I didn't get one right away because they were kind of expensive, but I saved up my money, and after a couple years in 2012, I got my very first iPad and began to use it in ministry every single day. And I loved that thing. It has been a great tool for me and for my ministry. And ever since then, I have consistently been using my iPad for preaching. Right here, this is my current iPad. This is the iPad Air 2. I got this about 4 years ago, and it has been a faithful workhorse ever since. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you do know that I'm not a huge fan of using an entire manuscript for preaching, but I do know that is some of your style. I like to use a little bit of notes, like a one-page outline, just so if I lose my place or if I get off track, I can look back down and know exactly where I need to go next. However, I know that everybody's got different styles. Everybody has their way of doing it. So if you're a manuscript preacher, if you're just a simple outline preacher, I'm going to show you a little bit of my process and how you can use the iPad for your preaching too. So the first thing you're going to want to do is format your sermon notes properly to fit on your iPad. And what I like to do is I like to use Pages. It's free. You can download it for free. It's pretty powerful, just up there with like Microsoft Word, and it's pretty easy to use. So what I like to do is I like to open up a new document. Say I'm starting from scratch. A lot of times I'll have this written on my computer already or somewhere else, but say I'm starting a new document from scratch, I'll start a landscape for my notes because I like having my iPad in landscape on the podium, not in portrait mode. And so I'll start my sermon here. And then what I'll do is I like to make it 2 columns. So I'll go here to the paintbrush, hit columns, go to 2. So there's a really simple, extremely basic idea of what a sermon outline, one-pager, could look like. So here's a sermon I preached a long time ago. I like to go in the 3 dots up here, go into the document setup, make my margins even wider. Just gives you room to fit everything on there. You can go almost all the way to the edge if you want. All right, so I put about a 1/2 inch margins around the page because you've got lots of space on here now. And I can fit all of this text on one little page. Now that might be a little small, but when I'm on stage, that works for me. But if I wanted to, I could adjust the size. So the next thing you do once you have your sermon outline is there's a few different options. One thing that people don't know is in the pages, you can actually click on this little dot, and there is a presenter mode if you really want to. And you can actually use your sermon notes like a teleprompter. Even with auto scrolling, you can turn that on. You can set the speed of how fast you want it to go. And then you can just sit there and you can read your message as it goes. It'll scroll for you, and if you need to get caught up, you can move it and you can go back, you can start it again. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that for preaching, but if that's something you want to do, if that's helpful for you, that's a cool little feature that a lot of people don't know about. It's a pretty underused feature in Pages. So the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to export it, and you're just going to click these little dots over here, hit export, because if you were to try to leave it on Pages and you want to try to preach from this, you could do that, but the problem is if you accidentally tap a button, all of a sudden you bring up your keyboard. That gets in the way of your whole vision of when you're preaching. You could also accidentally delete things, and that's a problem. So you really don't want it to be in an editable format. So when you click on these dots up here, you can go to export, and you can export it to a PDF, which is a document that you can write over it, but you can't edit the text. So in the new iPadOS, you can actually save it to your files, which is a great way to do it. Some people like to save it to, you can save it to iBooks, or you can save it to the Kindle app, or you could even save it into the Notes app or something else. Some people like to use a dedicated PDF reader app like Goodreader, which gives you some different options, but it costs a little bit of extra money. Now with the new iOS is you can just save it to files, and you can create a new one. I just created one called Preaching. You can save it right there in your Files app. So now if I bring up my Files app, here we are on my iPad, Preaching, my outline. And there you go. Now I have it right there. All right, but you're not done yet. There's some things you need to remember now when you are using your iPad, because if I were to leave my iPad just like this and try to preach with it, I could run into some serious problems and some serious distractions. First thing you need to make sure you do is turn on airplane mode. So if you scroll down on the iPad from the top right corner, you bring up this menu here and you want to tap that button that has the airplane on it. What this does is basically shuts off all of your Wi-Fi. If you have cellular on your iPad, it shuts that off. If you have Bluetooth, it shuts that down so that nothing else can get onto your iPad and interrupt the flow of what you're doing. You don't want a bunch of notifications popping up. You don't want someone trying to FaceTime you, or your mom is FaceTiming you in the middle of your sermon, right? You don't want anything that could be a distraction popping up, and airplane mode will help with that. So make sure you turn on airplane mode. Then you're also going to want to turn on the do not disturb mode, which is this one that looks like a moon. So hit that moon button. And what that does is make it so everything, your iPad is silenced and nothing disturbs you. However, here's a big warning. Do not disturb with that moon on only works by default when the iPad screen is locked, when you have it closed down. So what you need to do is you need to go into your settings, go into the do not disturb in your settings. And if you see here where it says silence, it says while iPad is locked, that's the default. You're going to want to check to always. So when do not disturb mode is on, you want to make sure that is always do not disturb. So even when you're using your iPad while preaching, you're not getting notifications and other things popping up. So make sure you switch that in your settings. And then another thing that you need to make sure you do is you're going to make sure you want to turn off auto lock. So you're going to go into your settings again, go into display and brightness, go down to where it says auto lock. And most iPads are set to automatically lock the screen if you haven't touched it in a certain amount of time. But when you're preaching for 30, 45, 60 minutes, however long you preach, you don't want your notes just shutting off on you. You want that to stay. Even if you never touch them, you want to click never on auto lock. Never automatically lock the screen on me, because that is really bad while you're preaching and can completely throw you off your game. All right, now that that's done, you're also going to want to come back into the settings and turn on rotation lock, which is the one with the lock on it with the little swirly arrow. And what that's going to do is lock your iPad. So if you were to pick it up and turn it, it doesn't rotate the screen. Everything's going to stay just like if you were holding a piece of paper where nothing adjusts when you move it around. Now you may not move it. You may just sit on table, but I've had it sometimes where it was kind of laying at a little bit of a different angle and it's flipped on me before. You bump it or whatever and it flips the screen on you. It can completely mess you up. So turn on the rotation lock. You don't want to mess with that. And then one last thing that you want to consider is the brightness of your screen. Now, just like this, the screen can be pretty bright with all this white background, especially if you have it turned way up. So you may want to consider getting into the room before you preach and checking out how bright it is on stage and whether or not you can see it if you turn down the darkness. But another really cool trick is just to invert the colors on your screen to almost set up your own dark mode, if you will. So if you get out of here, here's a cool trick. Go into settings, and if you go into accessibility, scroll down until accessibility shortcut, and then click on classic invert colors. And what that does is set a shortcut for when you triple click the home button, it actually automatically inverts the colors on the screen for you. And so when that is set up, then you can go back into your sermon, you can triple click that home button, and all of a sudden the background is black, the text is white, and it's giving off a whole lot less light shining up at you. And this is good for a few reasons. One, when you're standing on your stage and it's a dark stage and that screen is really bright, it can almost shine a light up at your face like you're trying to tell a scary story around a campfire. And you don't want that kind of look. It's not really a good look. You can look intimidating, you can look scary. It'll make everything around you glow, and that's not good. And another thing is, especially if you're somebody who wears glasses, you can actually get a reflection off your glasses off the screen if it's really bright. And the dimmer it is, the less that'll be, the less distracting your iPad will be. And the whole point about using tools for when you're preaching is to help add clarity to your message and not distract from your message. So anything you can do to eliminate distractions, turning off notifications, turning off sound, making sure no one can call you, and turning the brightness way down, that will really help. So that is how I will set up my notes to be able to preach. And then I'm ready to go. Now I'm preaching the word, I'm delivering it, and I can look down and I can see everything all right there at a quick glance. So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.